Okay, so let's widen the debate now by raising the big questions. Modi versus Macaulay. Was Prime Minister Modi wrong to target Thomas Macaulay for introducing English language to Indian education? Has English education inculcated modern values or created a colonial mindset? Has English education grown at the expense of Indian culture and languages? Is Modi's attack on Macaulay about politics or culture? India versus Bharat, is it a false binary? Joining me now, special guest, Professor Rakesh Sinha, author and former MP, and also Professor Shruti Kapila, Professor of History and Politics at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Suraj Yengde, he's been a scholar at Harvard and Oxford, writes on Dalit issues in particular. And Professor Aditya Mukherjee, one of India's most distinguished historians. Appreciate all of you joining us. Why don't you take it, Professor Shruti Kapila, first. Let's get a woman voice right at the outset. Tell me whether you believe that this is a false binary, India versus Bharat, Modi versus Macaulay, or as William Dalrymple suggests, it's the best of both worlds, or as Amish Tripathi suggests, India's mindset has got colonized over the years and we need to decolonize it.
I mean, I think all of it is true in some senses, given that I think British colonization had a profound and deep and irreversible change on modern life, and particularly India. It was, after all, a very kind of the main, as it were, part of the British Empire. So I wouldn't want to say, but having said that, I would say that whether it is, as it were, right-wing historians or left-wing historians or, centrist historians, there's no getting away from the categories of modern knowledge systems that got put into place, that were put into place about 200 or 300 years ago. So history writing, knowledge, whether the idea of India or the idea of Bharat, they're now going to be inflected by what happened in the last 200 to 300 years. And we will have...
Did we lose touch with our traditional sciences, our traditional knowledge? Ayurveda was an example that Amish Tripathi gave.
I mean, sure, that's a no-brainer. I mean, the thing is that modern life, as we understand it, whether it is, capital, economy, whether it is knowledge, science, or whether it is indeed government, because the thing about Macaulay's minute is that it comes in the 1830s, which is the birth of liberalism in the world. It's the birth of modern governance, modern state structures, the separation of power, all the things that we understand by modern government and bureaucracy, they're all laid down. In fact, India is the laboratory, if I can use that word, for these modern governance systems, which are then exported back to London. And that way, so the English language question is at the heart of, as it were, a radical change in statecraft, in education, in knowledge. And yes, there's nothing to, say yes or no on. I mean, this cannot be a fight. Whether it was Sanskrit knowledge systems or whether it was Mughal imperial systems, they were absolutely misshapen, retranslated, recategorized, and some of them were even killed off with the arrival of modern knowledge systems and which came with the freight of British colonization. And I just want to say one more thing. One more thing I do want to say, that there was a very uneven uptake of English education in India. Suraj is here. I'm sure he will speak to that as well later, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But what is interesting is that, the British go through a kind of mood swings with policy. So in the initial 30, 40 years, there's a kind of Indomania. So everything is Persian. In fact, William Dalrymple wrote White Mughals. I mean, that very idea that, they had to kind of conform to kind of Indian systems, that gives way in the early 1800s after empire is more kind of, settled, if I can say, if the country has been pacified, the big wars have been won. And that's really when, the English question comes on the table and new systems. And interestingly, it was actually Hindu upper castes who were the first enthusiastic, as it were, takers of English education.
That's an interesting point to take to you, Professor Rakesh Sinha. This was a process, this was a period of time wherein modern ideas were being brought to the world. And as Shruti Kapila puts it, among those who bought into the ideas, I will add the Parsis to the Hindu upper caste. They saw this as their way of social advancement. Now the Prime Minister seems to be creating some kind of a war between English language or English speakers and those who profess to focus on indigenous languages, when you can easily have the best of both worlds. And many Indians do.
I am surprised to see the hypocrisy of the Western intellectuals, those who are westernized or are still colonized. When Gogoi Wa Thyong, the African thinker, a writer and novelist, says that English had damaged the African culture, that Ubuntu, you are because I am because you are. This is the Ubuntu culture, which we had Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya. He says that language is not merely the mode of communication, it also carries the culture. And he wrote in 1977, The Decolonizing Mind. That is a path breaking in the field of the linguistic politics of the world. Therefore, I consider that what Prime Minister says is a very true, he touches the reality which has been ignored for decades and decades by the Congress and Nehruvian regime. What I want to communicate
what is it that troubles you most? Professor Rakesh Sinha, what is it that troubles you most? What is it that troubles you most about this so-called colonized mind?
You don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, what trouble me? What does not trouble me? That is not the question. Let me complete my point of view.
Please
you have
do.
not intervened there. You see, the English is a language. English is a language. We don't hate any language. English is a language. It has a contribution. The discourse in modern discourse, it has a vital contribution. But my question is that introduction of the English and the hegemony of the English in India. What contribution Indians made by utilizing English? Any fundamental contribution in social science? We became the subordination to the Western intellectuals. And what subaltern says and what Prime Minister Narendra Modi says, there is a common ground. Europe is a province. English is one of the languages.
Right.
The way it was explained that English has introduced everything in India. Without English, India was nothing. India would have been nothing. So I consider that the Indian languages, Rajdeep, there is one important issue that due to domination of the English, the vernacular intellectuals, so the vernacular is a very derogatory term now, Indian languages intellectuals have been suppressed. The intellectuals in Malayali, intellectuals in Kannada language, intellectuals in Odia language, intellectuals in Bengali language. The Gitanjali was written in Bengali. He got the name and fame all over the world. So it is misnomer. The cosmopolitan, the idea of cosmopolitanism was Rabindranath Tagore. It is not, we have not borrowed from any British
you make a good, okay, you make a good point. Rakesh, you make a good point. Let me take that to Professor Mukherjee.
Let me complete. Let me just give me 10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Okay,
I am
10
just
seconds.
10 seconds. What Franz Fanon said about the colonialism is not a system. It is not a thinking pattern. It should be erased from bottom. Everything should, no vestige should remain because it inspires the people to become imitators. Right from 1947, Aditya Mukherjee is here. We are textbook writers. Everything is coming from the West. They said globalization. They betrayed the globalization. Entire Indian intellectuals were for globalization because the Europe has given the concept of globalization. It is America and Europe. They betrayed the globalization. They said postmodernism.
You made your point. You're saying we've created an imitative culture.
Our own legs.
You've created an imitative culture. We haven't stood on our own feet as a result. Aditya Mukherjee, respond to what you've just heard.
You see this, that the colonial mindset that Macaulay represents needs to be opposed is obvious. But to say that Mr. Modi is now going to do it in the next 10 years is to reinvent the wheel, is to appropriate what others have already done, is to say, is it something like what Kangana Rao said, independence came only in 2014, 47 mein to bheek mili thi hame. Since the 19th century, since Macaulay, the Indian thinkers have been critiquing colonialism in a manner which is absolutely amazing. The early nationalists created the most comprehensive economic critique of imperialism way before Marx and Lenin and Hobson. So we have this whole tradition from Naroji, Ranade, Gokhale, G.V. Joshi, R.C. Dutt. It is people who were not part of this anti-colonial struggle who now are telling us that we should decolonize.
So you're saying the Bharat versus India debate is a false binary? It's a false debate being created for politics and not about really about any cultural war out there?
It's the language. You see, when you put the central issue as the language, you're making a very big mistake. Our tallest nationalist leaders, who were educated, which is an important thing these days, were educated in English, and many of them in England. Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, Patel were educated in England, but they did not pick up colonial values from there. That language brings, English language has brought, as somebody said a little while ago, Enlightenment values is rubbish. There are alternate routes to modernity. Way before Enlightenment in Europe, Akbar in the 16th century is talking of reason, rationality, he's talking of universal religion. He's holding in his court debates of between Christian priests, Muslim Maulvis and Hindu priests. You know, so there is, so who has said, Ramon Roy writes his seminal piece, Tuhafat, before he learnt English. He did it on the basis of his knowledge of Sanskrit and Persian. So it's not language that is the issue. It is whether you are picking up what is colonial from the West, or whether you are picking up what is modern, what is new, what is progressive.
I have to intervene.
You know, I'll let you in a moment, but let Suraj Yengde respond, because Suraj, you know, the notion of modernity, and Ambedkar writes about it and has spoken about it. Actually, in a way, it freed and unshackled many of the backward caste groups, many of the Dalits in particular, which hadn't happened in a sense before the 18th century, where the caste system was as rigid as ever. So in a way, the unshackling of many of the caste boundaries in particular opened up as a result of exposure to this modern education. I'm not using the word English, but modern values. Do you agree?
Yeah, thank you, Rajdeep. It's good to see you. And I agree with almost everyone who has contributed, from William to Professor Mukherjee here. And the agreement is almost, you know, we have to find a balance, which of course you're also advocating. Now the question is, it's not about Macaulay per se. So if we reduce Macaulay to something of a colonial hangover, then where do we go? Do we go to Manu? And so the question is not necessarily Modi versus Macaulay, is it Manu versus Macaulay? And if we go back to the values of Manu, we are back to square one, which really challenges the ethos of Indian constitution and democracy. Now, let me tell you, with English language that we have, the way Ashish Nandi, as you has pointed out, as a cricket is an Indian game, so English has also undergone its own formulation. So Indian English is different than British English. So when I went to England way back in 2011, I wrote an essay in English, and my professor in the UK couldn't really surmise the argument, because I was educated in a state medium English school, as opposed to those international or central board English education, which is heavily subsidized by the cultural capital of the West, as opposed to the state medium English schools, which really give you both of the two worlds. And now, for example, if we really have to decolonize, we really fall into a very riskier trap. Do we go back to the hegemonic ideals of Brahminical hierarchy, or, and I agree with Prime Minister Modi, who was saying in his speech with reference to Macaulay, that the younger generation doesn't look it as our heritage, but just looks at mortars and bricks, which I appreciate. However, we need to have an insertion of a rationalistic thought. And around the same time, 1835, when minutes were written, about the same time and 2 years later, James Prinsep deciphers Brahmi script that gives rise to this huge canvas of Buddhist economy of philosophies that are just that are just available. And so what we see here, English medium education has given rise to elites that are also what we call now English medium Hindutva, which is, the president of BJP himself went to this English medium school, JP Nadda, getting educated, and the people who are opposing English language, which I appreciate, without really accounting their own complicity in this, where their children are studying here abroad, where I am at, in UK and other parts of the world.